I'm Shannon Moore, and this is Formation. Over the next few weeks here on the podcast, we are visiting with some local leaders and leaders from beyond our community to talk about the Love Your Neighbor initiative that is going on here at UCC. I hope that you will join us for these very special episodes. Welcome to Formation, a weekly podcast from University Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas, where every week I sit down with someone and we talk about faith. Today, as part of our Love Your Neighbor campaign here at UCC, I am thrilled to welcome Reverend Monica Bradley.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
We've known each other for 5 years now.
5 years.
And we met when you were in seminary. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Wow. That seemed like it was such a long time ago.
It does, because it was during, COVID hit in the middle of that
Yes.
year, right?
Yes.
I led a theological reflection group for your supervised ministry
For my TRG, yeah.
class, yeah. And that's how we met and really just hit it off. That was a great group of folks. It was a diverse group of a diverse theology.
Yes. I think we were all stretched in many ways, but under your leadership, I think the group really had a great time together and were.
Yeah, I think so too. And then, not long after, you came on staff here for a bit and helped us with some digital ministry and really a variety of things. And that was great fun to work with you too. Yeah. But now you're ordained, and what's your job now?
Well, I actually have two jobs. My primary position is the director of admissions at Brite Divinity School, which is something that comes very, very natural to me. Prior to seminary, for 10 years, I was a recruiter in the non-public sector. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, recruiting mentors, foster parents, and volunteers. So when the position came open at Brite, I was invited to apply, and it's come very, very natural.
Well, and you love Brite.
Love Brite.
So it's easy for you to talk it up.
Yeah.
And then what's your other position?
I'm actually the senior associate pastor at New Church in Dallas, senior associate pastor of Justice. So I do that part-time, and recently started a Justice and Jazz ministry that happens once a month on the third Sunday at 5 p.m. at St. Paul United Church of Christ, where New Church worships at.
Okay, great. Yeah. I do want to mention, I apologize for the banging into our listeners also. We're in the middle of a big construction project here. For some reason, they don't want to stop when I'm recording a podcast, so forgive the noise. I always like to ask, tell me about your childhood faith, or was there, faith development when you were growing up? What did your childhood look like as far as faith development?
Yeah, I was really blessed. I come from generations of believers. Inherited my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother's faith. I grew up in the Methodist Church, Independent Methodist Church, which was a sect that came out of the African American Episcopal Church. And that was all of my life up until I was 18 years old. But another instrumental part was I was an athlete from elementary all the way up to high school. And so I was a part of Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Actually, the first chapter at my junior high school and high school. And so that was real instrumental in my life.
What was that experience like? What sort of, how did that influence your faith, that organization in particular of athletes?
Well, I'll never forget, and it's kind of where I first heard my call come from. I was in junior high school, and we were at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes summer camp on the campus of Baylor University. And I'll always remember Tom Landry and Madeline Manning Mims were the keynotes. Tom Landry for the boys, and Madeline for the girls. And Madeline came and shared her story about having spinal meningitis at the age of 3. And the doctors told her that, told her mother that she would not live. And if she did, she wouldn't be able to do the things that children normally do.
Goodness.
And Madeline became a gold medalist, an Olympian, ran like a gazelle, and had a ministry that was called Running for Jesus. And God spoke to my heart when Madeline shared her story that night in chapel, that if God was able to use Madeline, that God surely would be able to use me. And that call never left me. And I served 20 plus years in social services, so I felt like I was living out my call doing that work.
Right.
And then I turned this particular significant birthday, and God said, I really want you to go all in. And I had been in the United Church of Christ for about 8 years at that time, and had a conversation with my pastor about this call that had, been just nudging at me all of my life since junior high school. And so he affirmed it, and he said, well, you're going to have to go to seminary. An interesting story, and I love telling this story because he was a graduate. This was the Reverend Dr. J. Lee Hill.
Okay.
He was a graduate of Wake Forest and Emory School of Theology. And he said, but if I was you, I would go to Brite Divinity School. I was thinking I could go to Point Loma. He said, you cannot do that. You should go to Brite Divinity School. Check out Brite. And we talked about other schools, but he said, check out Brite first. And, Steve Sprinkle and Wilda Gaffney are there, and they are great scholars and theologians. And I started checking out Brite, and then he came back and he said, someone's going to give you a call from Wake Forest. I said, I'm going to Brite. And as a fully grown woman, I left everything that was safe and familiar to me in California. Got my daughter to move into my home, and came to Brite. Lived in graduate housing. All my friends thought I was crazy, to quit my job and do this. But, God has been faithful.
Mm-hmm. What led you to the United Church of Christ?
Wow. That's a great question, Shannon. I was at a community forum when marriage equality first came into conversation in San Diego. And it was a community forum in the Black faith community in San Diego. And it was led by the local Black newspaper editor. And there were pastors that were on the panel. And they were having conversations, a little debate about this. And there was one pastor, the Reverend Art Cripps, who was the senior pastor at my home church in San Diego, Christian Fellowship Congregational Church. And Art Cripps said something simple, and it was really in opposition to everyone that was there that was on that panel. And he said, you can't help who you fall in love with. And it was that simple, and it spoke to my heart. And I said, and he had this wonderful voice. Very eloquent. He was a journalist, and so a radio commentator. And I said, I don't know where he preaches at or where he pastors, but I want to go to his church. And it took me about a year to make my way to that church, Christian Fellowship. And when I did, Pastor Cribs was no longer there. But the Reverend Dr. J. Lee Hill was there, and who is my faith father in the ministry. But interesting, when I got ordained at my home church in San Diego, Pastor Hill had left and was a canon in the Episcopal Church in the Virginia Diocese, and Pastor Cribs had come back to pastor Christian Fellowship, so I had the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's really a full circle. Full circle. Well, we are going to take a short break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about loving our neighbors.
Okay.
All right, so we'll be right back and continue this conversation with Reverend Monica Bradley.
Hi, I'm Russ Peterman, Senior Minister of University Christian Church Disciples of Christ here in Fort Worth. And I don't know about you, but one of the things that keeps me up at night is the division that I see in our nation. And as this 2024 election cycle heats up, communities and neighborhoods are going to become even more divided, less kind, more polarized than we already are, maybe more than we've ever been. But at UCC, we believe that Jesus offers a better way of engaging one another. He calls us to love our neighbors and to actively embody kindness. You see, we believe that as a church, we need to be active in bringing our community together. And so we're going to do just that with a church-wide grassroots campaign that we are calling Love Your Neighbor. And this neighborhood movement will focus on actively modeling kindness, working towards inclusive community, and doing all that we can to undo polarization. So I hope you'll join us in this movement, because in a time filled with negativity, we all have a choice to make. We can choose to love our neighbors. And if we do that, we will have accomplished more than just making it through an election. You see, we have the power and the courage to make our neighborhoods, our community, our nation look even more like the kingdom of God.
We are back, continuing our conversation with Reverend Monica Bradley. So Monica, I mentioned before we took the break, UCC is doing a grassroots initiative that's called Love Your Neighbor. Maybe you've heard that expression before somewhere.
I
Who
think Jesus
that?
said.
Oh yeah, it was Jesus. We're in such a strange time in our culture, in our world. We've got this big contentious election coming up, and as a congregation, we are striving to find ways to lower the temperature, to reach out to one another instead of alienating ourselves from those who are right here in our neighborhood. What does it mean to you as a Christian, as a minister, as a follower of Jesus, to love your neighbor?
Wow, it's a great mission that you all have here at University Christian. To me, just to love those who are different from me. And I think the first question is, who is our neighbor? You know, it's often, a lot of times when we think of the American lifestyle, a lot of times we have neighbors that we never interact and engage with. And a lot of times it could be people that are very different, from us. But a lot of times we never get to know that because that outreach is not there.
Mm-hmm. So who makes the first step, I guess? Or what is a good first step to connect with people who might be in the neighborhood, but we don't know? You think there would be suspicion if you just sort of showed up on somebody's doorstep, or I don't know. What do you think is a good way to meet people and to meet and be neighbor to people you don't know?
I always start with the basics, just saying hi.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, that's the first step. It's just, hello, how you doing? And sometimes I think in our lifestyles, we're so busy and we're getting to the next thing. And then after all that is done, we're getting home. We're opening the garage, pulling the car in, and that's it. And we just don't always engage and interact with those who are different. And a lot of times, because our lives have us so busy, we're in these silos and, with our family first and then with close friends. And I think it's just reaching out. And even, in work settings, those who think and look differently than we do. And I think food is always a great common denominator. We all love to eat. We have to eat. And, having a meal with folks,
You're talking about that reminds me of a woman I used to work with when I was at an insurance company before I moved here and went to Brite myself. I remember her saying that there were days in a row where she would never step outside because she parked in her carport, her covered garage at home, and we had a covered garage at the office, and she brought her lunch every day and ate her lunch at her desk. And she would go days without ever stepping foot out in creation or sharing a meal with somebody else. And that always, I've thought about that many times over the years. And she was a lovely, lovely person, but just how closed off that seems. And I think she's probably not alone in that kind of lifestyle.
I think you're right, Shannon. And one of the things when I started thinking about, the topic and what we were going to, spend some time talking about is that we have to be intentional about loving our neighbor, especially when we're different, especially when there's any type of conflict there, because, when there is a certain discomfort, we have a tendency not to just to get away. We don't want to engage. And then if someone really upsets us, the response might not always be a pretty one. So we have to really decide before we get to that place of discomfort or disagreement, the ways that we're going to respond and engage.
I was I had to drive to Frisco a couple of days
Okay.
last week. As a haul, rush hour, it's, you know, can really get to you. And somebody one morning was trying to get into the lane where I was, had the turn signal on and everything. Well, I looked up and they had a sticker for a certain politician that is not my candidate of choice. And my very first inclination was, I'm not letting them in. And then I thought, how ridiculous is that? We have this difference that you just mentioned. So this person I don't even know, other than who they're going to vote for, and I'm going to block them from getting where they need to go. I was ashamed of myself.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing I think that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I think that's why Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, because he knew how difficult it is to engage and to have a desire to be in relationship with those folks who are different from us. And the fact that, when he was talking to the lawyer in the story of Luke 10, and the lawyer was asking him, what's the most important thing, and Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself.
It's in the law. You know it. I mean,
And the fact that he calls that out, and just the simplicity of it, but also on the other end, how difficult that can be when people are different from us. And I think in what we're going to be faced with in a couple of weeks, we are going to have to be, in a couple of months, I should say, intentional about being in community and loving those who are different from us. And a lot of times the outcome is beautiful, because, we have a tendency to be judgmental about those from afar, because we don't know people.
right.
And once you allow yourself to get a little closer, beautiful relationships can come out of that. I think about the rest of that passage, with the Samaritan, and how he goes and helps that person who's different from him and who's in need, and how he ensures that that person is going to be taken care of, and he pays the person to provide care. I can only imagine the next time that he came through that area, that person was either looking for him or he was looking for them, and what could possibly have blossomed out of that kind deed.
Our senior minister, Russ Peterman, just preached on this text very recently. And the thing that stood out to me, I think for the first time, as many times as I've heard this text, is I wonder the fear that the injured man felt seeing somebody who is an enemy coming toward him. Is this person, are they going to hurt me more?
Absolutely.
Are they going to finish me off? And then the trust of allowing himself to be taken care of, because we're not very good at that either sometimes. A lot of times we want to go out, we want to help, but we don't want to receive help when we need it. And so I think having that openness both ways, not only to reach out, but to be reached out
Yeah.
to
To
is
receive.
really important. Yeah.
Yeah, the exchange that happened, I think, is where God is and where the miracle happens.
And
Both ways.
Exactly. And that's something, going back to where we started, our relationship in that theological reflection group, where there was such difference of opinion about politics and theology and faith. But we talked about it. And where did that happen? Brite Divinity
Brite
School.
Divinity School. Well, part of our ethos at Brite is diversity and inclusion. And so we're always being pushed to think differently and to embrace those who are different. One of the things that I love about Brite is in 1952, prior to Brown versus Board of Education, Brite admitted its first African-American student. Before, it was a popular thing to do, and there was a lot of flack that was given to Brite for doing that. And that was James Claiborne. And then a few months later, Veda Felder applied, and she was actually the first African-American to graduate, to be a graduate of TCU and Brite. And Brite, was doing those type of things in 1952. And
Pretty remarkable.
oh, it's amazing.
Well, speaking of Brite, something else that's really important for Brite is social justice. And of course, you are a minister for justice at your other job. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that relates to loving our neighbor?
Yeah. So a part of our vision at Brite is a world that's going to be transformed, that's being transformed ongoingly with God's love, mercy, and justice. And so that's a part of who we are at Brite. And I think the justice piece is loving your neighbor. You're going to look for any type of injustice that is happening, and we're trained to do that at Brite. It's a part of who we are, and loving your neighbor. Those who are housing insecure, those who are excluded, who are being othered in any type of way, is what justice is about. And I believe that Jesus was our greatest model for being a justice seeker. Yes. And I could talk about that for days and days, but I don't want to take up, all of your time. But
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your time. We're just about out of time, but thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us about your experience and Brite and social justice and everything you talked about. It was
Thank
really
you for
good.
inviting me to come back.
Absolutely.
I think I consider University Christian to be home to a certain degree here in Fort Worth. So anytime I can come across the street, I'm always happy to do so, Shannon.
Well, thank you. And thank you for listening. If you'd like to share your faith story on the Red Couch, send me an email, formation@uccftw.com. Take care. Have a great week.